All right, we are back. Welcome everyone back for session 2 of our 5-part series in the CAHTA. This is how to conduct a market study. I'm glad that we've got, looks like we have most of our groups together for our market study project. And I know there'll be questions along the way, but that's why it's good to go ahead and start getting our groups and forming those and start making some of the decisions so we can kind of get the things rolling. And I was asked earlier today in the class, how, what do you expect from us at this point? Well, the only thing I would expect maybe at this point is you just go ahead and start communicating with each other a little bit. Maybe go ahead and start forming that. How do you want to do this project? What's your attack plan, right, for this project? If you want to divide up the work, maybe it's just at this point, we want to schedule a Zoom call, every 3 weeks or whatever it might be to talk about the project or whatever you feel you need to do. We have that deadline out there, and I've emailed that deadline for you. I don't have it in front of me. You probably know that, but we're going to be flexible, as I said, on that. We know that everyone here has things ongoing. We all have day jobs that we're doing, and if you can't get to that project, again, whether you're working independently or in a group, just let me know. All right. Again, I'm going to be flexible with you on that. All right. But we did want to set that date out there. So that is your target date. So try to get it in before then. But if not, we're going to work with you on it. All right. We will treat these projects as a kind of a pass, no pass. And in the future, I always recommend that professors do the same thing with their students. When the students submit that project, is that step 2 in getting their CAHTA certification. You'll have a rubric that was in that Dropbox folder for you that can help you evaluate any of the 4 projects, whichever one you decide to do with your students in the future when offering the CAHTA. And I'll follow that same rubric, when I'm looking at your presentations that you're going to submit. Now, the only difference is you're just going to submit those projects in the PowerPoint or Prezi or whatever you decide to use. You're not actually going to have to present them. All right. You're just going to submit them to me. I will provide you with some feedback if there's some things that if I have questions or things I need clarification on, or things that I feel could probably, maybe be improved upon. I'll let you know that. You can make the changes, resubmit it, and then you get a pass. All right. So it's not like it's a one shot and you didn't make it, sorry, and you're out. Okay. We don't do that. And again, if you're students, I would suggest you do the same thing. It's a learning opportunity for them, and you could treat it as such. Have them submit it, check them over. The first time you offer the CAHTA and supervise your students in the completion of their projects, as we talked about last week, send me a couple of those. I'm happy to review those, especially the first time, and then provide you with a little feedback, some comments, and my own kind of take on their presentation. And that'll give you a good idea. That might be helpful the first time. And then that will also then meet you as the professor, the instructor's requirement of delivering the CHIA, or excuse me, the CAHTA to your students. You've taken them through the training, they've taken the exam, you've now supervised them as they completed their project, and then it earns you the CAHTA authorized instructor certificate. Okay, so that's the only requirement there for you to get that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this week's material. This is how to conduct a market study. This is the abbreviated version, as we talked about last week as well. We have in the CAHTA folder, we can make these available to you. If you're an academic member, through your membership in the Share Center, you should already have access to this in the Dropbox folder. But we have expanded versions of PowerPoints of each of the different research projects. Single PowerPoints. This is the abbreviated version where we consolidate all of this into a single PowerPoint. So our agenda for today, first of all, we're going to define what is a market study. We're going to talk about the different components that would be included in a market study. And then we're just going to walk through each section here. What should be included? What is expected? What are the, what are we learning from the different components within the market study? So we'll walk through those. As you see, those are here from step 2 through 10. I'll spend a lot of time emphasizing and talking about number 10, because I, again, do feel that that's probably the most important part of the market study. And then we'll talk about different market study variations, and then getting started on your market study, your next steps. So, of course, what is a market study? You know, in market studies, it says in this context is the analysis of a group of hotels to provide an overview of the hotel industry and to share insights. What have we learned from our analysis? How's the group of hotels performing and what makes them unique? Now, the group of hotels for this market study, and typically when we think about a market study, it's on a market, right? Which is, as we define these, as a major city. They could be on a smaller city, what we call submarkets. And if anyone, you know, in the future, if you wanted your students to do one on a smaller city, you could reach out to us, let us know what selection of cities or group of cities your students are using for their market study. And we can let you know the amount of data and that we have for that area, how we have that area defined, whether it is a market or a submarket. In some market studies, you could also study other things as well, right? You could, of course, study a region, a country, up to a continent if you wanted to. You could do analysis on a specific group of hotels within an area, or it could be done on a portfolio, a company's portfolio of hotels as well. That's much more targeted and specific and narrow and focused than what we're looking at when we do, we talk about the market study again in the context that we're going to do ours. When it comes to the components, again, this is the comprehensive study PowerPoint. This is the abbreviated version. There are expanded versions we talked about that takes you a little bit more in depth. So I encourage you use that as you prepare to work on your own market study project. Pop open that longer PowerPoint. You'll all have that available to you in the Dropbox folder so that you can use that as you're going along. There are the different components, different versions of a market study. This is an example of a comprehensive market study. This is a little more detailed here, right? You'll notice all of the different things that we talked about earlier, things like general makeup of the market, current statistics, trended data. We've also included there in the comprehensive, you see economic cycles. All right, that's not in the version we're looking at. Market breakdowns, comparable markets, types of business. In types of business, there are different types of business we can analyze. Things like weekday and weekend, day of week. We can look at seasonality. We can look at group versus transient business. You remember that from the CHIA training, right? Different segments of types of business. Daily data. Daily data could be included in a comprehensive version, especially if there is some sort of event that has major impact on that market, you know, a political event, weather event, a sporting event, perhaps. That might be an important part of the story to tell for your market. And it could be included, and you could use daily data to do that. Pipeline data, talking about hotel development. And those next three, host or profitability, that's, of course, is talking about revenues and expenses, operating ratios for hotels within the market. Additional third-party data, we're going to talk about that. Forecasted data, that could be an option. And then, of course, the last two would be included in all versions, summary and takeaways, and then, again, looking ahead and for the future. The abbreviated version, this is a shorter version. This is actually the one that we're going to do for your market study project. Now, for those academics, your students are required as part of achieving their CAHTA project, they are required to do the comprehensive version, okay? This is the version they would need to do. We're going to be doing this one for our market study, okay? A little bit shorter, an abbreviated version. So these are the areas we're going to walk through here in just a few moments. And then there's even a brief version, which is even shorter there, which is really just very high level overview of what's happening in our market. So let's look at the first component that we come to in our market study, the general makeup of the market. We provided you with property and room count information for your markets. Now, in that property and room counts, we're providing both census and sample, hotels and rooms. Census, of course, as we know, are existing hotels. Sample are those that are submitting performance data to STR. Now, we're providing this to you for your market study project at multiple levels. You have this information by market, by submarket, by scale, class, location, and other categories as well. Now, this does help us get the lay of the land, if you will, for our market, right? It's a basic understanding of how many hotels are there, how many hotels are in different segments within our market, and then what sort of data do we have? We're going to be using a lot of and reporting on a lot of performance data in our market analysis. We need to know how good that data really is. Is it representative of the different segments and how they're performing? Is it actionable data then that we can talk about? If it's not, then we may need to mention that. That's something STR has always been very good. We're very transparent about our sample. We'll tell you what the numbers are, and it's up to the users of the data to then say, okay, I do feel that that data is robust enough that it really is representative of performance in that area. What you could always request then, if you see a small sample, get a participation list. Reach out to STR, whoever your person might be, maybe it's me, and get a participation list for that area so you can see exactly which hotels are reporting their data to STR. That could help you determine if it is representative or not, right? So we're going to include that census and sample information in there. Again, it's worth noting, if you see areas where the sample is a bit weak, note that, mention that in your presentation. Okay. Here's some examples looking at the Nashville market, and that's what we're going to use as an example in this training today. Here's Nashville market by submarket. Here's Nashville market by scale, and then the Nashville market by class of hotels. You can also see here Nashville by chains that are represented in the market, as well as parent companies listed. And from that information, you can put some graphs together, some slides together to provide sort of an opening overview of their market. This is an introduction to the market, okay? Here's information by submarket. Now, last week we talked about the layout of these slides. These are meant to serve as helpful templates for you. You can use these slides in your presentation, just changing the information, or create your own slide template and just use these as an example of what could be included, the layout, and so on. Now, also I mentioned last week, if you recall, the format here we have at the top of all of our slides, we like to tell you, what are you looking at, right? Here's properties and rooms by submarket for the Nashville market as of November of 2019. We include our takeaways or our notes there at the bottom. Those should be, again, the story that you're trying to tell. What is the key thing that you want your audience to take away, to know about that slide from the information you're including on that slide? If you want to put that at the top as a headline, move the information we have here at the top to the bottom, that's certainly okay. Use your own ideas for this. One thing I will say on this, though, if you're working in a group, be consistent. All right. If you talk about it ahead of time, or if you have a cleanup person at the end, right? So you're all sending your slides to one person, and that one person's responsibility is to go in and have everything kind of looking the same, the formatting the same. Please do that. That's important. It should look as if one person, right, has put together that entire presentation, even though it may be 3 or 4 of you. Here's information, property and room counts by scale, for example, yeah, and then property and room counts by class here in the Nashville market. Here's an example. Now, these are, of course, putting this in a chart form or a table form. You could also use a graph. This is, of course, a nice way of representing the data as well. This, of course, is the number of hotel rooms by chain represented in the Nashville market, ranked from the largest to the smallest. And we have a cutout here of 600 rooms or more. You can use either version, either a table format or a graph like this. Do not use both. There's no need. That's redundant. Okay. You can pick either though. In the intro area here of the market, when you're doing your general makeup of the market, we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the additional data that you could include in your market study. different types of economic data, data from other sources in the market, like visitor information, airport, employment, deployment data. What are some of the major demand generators within the market? This is generally where those would be included. Another slide or two here, because you are introducing your market. What's the general makeup of our market? Students as well, oftentimes, especially in our student market study competitions, would like to include a video at the very beginning. They typically reach out to the local tourism bureau. They get a video that showcases, it's those little 2-minute videos or 3-minute videos that showcase the market. And those are really nice. If you're not familiar with the market, if you've never been to Hong Kong, if I can see a 3-minute video on Hong Kong that's flashy and it talks about the major attractions and what's great about Hong Kong, that's going to get me inspired and kind of fired up from the beginning before you even start laying out your analysis and those details. I will, in the future though, if you are a professor who is supervising a team that is in the market study competition, it's certainly okay to include those videos in the presentations, but those are timed presentations. Students have 30 minutes in those competitions. If a video takes up 3 minutes, that's 3 precious minutes of time, right, that they're using for that video. I'm not saying don't use them. I think they're nice. They can add to the presentation, but just be cognizant that that it's using up time. Okay. Now, having said that, I don't expect any of you to include a video unless you want to. That's totally up to you. If you want to, feel free to, but don't feel like you need to include a video or you don't get bonus points for including the video. Okay. All right. So that's the general makeup of the market. That gets us to the second component, and that's current statistics. Now, the current statistics, this is one slide. This is a snapshot showing the current performance for the market. We're going to display both the actual values and percent changes, our key performance indicators, right? Our occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR, as well as our raw values, the room supply, room demand, and room revenue. Now, there are a couple of places that we can find the numbers to include in our current statistics. In the trend report, there is a running 12-month tab, okay? It's running 12-month or 12-month moving average, whatever you want to call it, tab in the trend report. You can essentially go to that tab, go to the very bottom row, and that bottom row includes the latest 12-month moving average numbers, all right? Now, why do we use 12-month moving average instead of the current month or the current year to date? Well, those can be a little misleading, can't they? It could be high season in that market, and those numbers are going to look very good. And the same thing with year to date. We're not maybe accounting for the entire year. We may be leaving out some high months or some low months. And that's why we like to use that 12-month, the latest 12-month moving average number, because that's going to be an average of the last 12-month period. We're bringing in the last 12 months. So we're capturing the high seasons and the low seasons. We're averaging all that together to really get a good picture of what the most recent performance looks like. All right. So here's where that tab looks like in our trend report, 12-month moving average with percent changes. You can just go to that very last slide, and there it is, right? There's our 3 KPIs. There's our raw data with the year-over-year percent changes. And that year-over-year change, as we know, is over the comparable 12 months before, right? So for example, here in November, our 12-month period is from December of 2018 through November of 2019. We're averaging the monthly data for those 12 months. The percent change that we see here is over the same period, the prior 12 months, right? So it's going to be over November 2019 12-month moving average. We're comparing that to November 2018's 12-month moving average, for example, here. Everyone good with that? Okay. It's also good on that slide to include, if there is a record, if the current number of hotels or the current occupancy is a record high or a record low, if the latest room revenue number is a record high or a record low, we can include that on there as well. Just put a little footnote on there on that slide. We could also include some ranking information. We could compare our market to other markets in the country, in the region, whatever you might want to use. Here in the United States, for example, what often is done is they'll compare New York to the other top 25 markets here in the United States, the 25 largest hotel markets in the United States. And then you could put the place or the rank. So for example, New York might be the number one market in the US for occupancy. It could be the number two market for ADR. It could be the number, 4 market for overall room supply. If you want to include that, compare that to some other markets, and you can do that as well. To get the latest room counts, hotel and room counts for the market, there's another tab in the trend report that's going to include that, and that is the raw data tab. That's monthly data. And again, you can just go to the latest month that is shown there. Go over to those last couple of columns where it says census props and rooms, and that's going to show it to you right there. Example right here in Nashville, we can see that there are 403 hotels with just under 47,000 rooms. Okay. Now we've got all of our information pulled together. We're ready to put this on our slide. Here's an example of our current statistics slide for Nashville. We're saying that there's the number of hotels, number of rooms, and then we're including the room supply, room demand, occupancy, ADR, RevPAR, and room revenue. We're noting that it is a historic record. I would also note that be sure you mention if it's a historic high or low, because right now it could be a historic low record, right? And then also with the percent changes year over year, include those so we can see how things have either improved or declined. Now, you're going to have the latest 12-month moving average data in your file there. It's not going to look good, right? We know that. We're coming off a very bad year last year. That's okay. The data is what the data is. It doesn't matter. You're not, this isn't to convince someone of anything. You're just doing the analysis of the numbers and presenting that analysis, okay? So don't worry if those numbers are not stellar numbers. All right, let's pause here before we look at trended data. And does anyone have any questions? Anyone have questions? Everyone's pretty good? Has anyone actually ever been to Nashville, Tennessee? Anyone else on here? Stephen, you're the only one.
I have.
You and I. Oh, and Aaron, you've been to Nashville.
Yeah, I was in the Army, so I was stationed at Fort Campbell, and I used to go there over the weekends.
Oh, okay, very good. We should talk. I was in the Army once as well. I was at Fort Knox.
Oh yeah, I was
other places.
Air Defense.
I was a scout.
Okay. Cav Scout.
I was a Cav Scout. Cav. That's right. This is thank you. This is downtown Nashville. This is our entertainment area there in downtown Nashville. I know for some of you, this is going to look very, very small, but I assure you what it lacks in size, it makes up in intensity and in excitement for sure. It is very busy and very loud just about every day of the week if the weather is okay, especially on weekends. All right, so trended data. After the current snapshot of data in the current statistics slide, now we're going to drill down into some historic data. This is where we're taking a longitudinal look at performance in our market. Here we are going to use running 12-month data as well. For these graphs, it's going to help remove the seasonal distortions. It helps us see those nice smooth trends, right? What does occupancy look like in our market? Is it up? Is it down? Is it flat? What's happening? Using the 12-month moving average data, we can easily see that, determine that, and visualize that in our graphs. We're going to highlight trends over time. We can note highs or lows in our data. We can indicate average slope if you want to. If there are things that have impacted performance, we mentioned this last week, things that have impacted performance, note those things. Inform your audience. What caused that drop in supply? What caused that peak in demand? They may not know that. Don't assume that your audience understands and has that insight already in your market. Approach this as if they do not, and you're informing them about it, right? Do be careful not to use too many lines, 2 or 3 at the most on a graph. More than that, they get very busy. All right. So here, excuse me again, 12-month moving average tab in our trend report. We've talked about this, real easy. Click, drag, copy, paste, right? It's real easy to put this into our presentations. Here's a slide. We shared these last week, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. We use this as an example. Nashville room supply demand percent changes. I like to include, especially here, the ending point. So what does it look like right now? Now, we just showed that on the current statistics slides, right? We just shared with them what the latest supply and demand 12-month moving average numbers were. Put them on here, though, for perspective. Put on there, we noticed the high, we noticed the low. We've also mentioned a couple of things that caused or impacted performance or impacted supply in our market. Here's looking at actual supply and demand. I think we saw this one last week as well. Here's occupancy and ADR percent changes. Again, note where we're at now, the latest numbers there on the right, note the highs, the lows, and things that may have impacted the market performance. And then our actuals. All right. The next one, market breakdown. So after looking at the data from a historical perspective, we can now drill down into various sub-segments to see how they're contributing to the overall market performance. You can look at data by different, both geographic and non-geographic categories here. We talked about these in the CHIA, right? By geographic, things like sub-market. By non-geographic, things like scale or class. And you can also look at other things as well. You could look at information or data by location types, by size groupings, by ages of hotels, other types or categories you could use. There are a few in this, though, that we want to be sure we include. All right. You can display both the raw data and the key performance indicators, the actuals again, and the percent changes. You can include, it's typically with these, it's good to include just the latest 12-month numbers for each segment in those categories. And because we're going to be displaying all submarkets within our market, or all classes within our market, or all scales within our market, we don't, again, want these to get too busy. So it's fine to just include the latest. If you want to group these and show the current supply and demand, for example, by submarket, in each of the submarkets on one graph, that's great. If you want to include multiple years, if you have only a few submarkets in your market and you want to show a couple of years of supply change or demand change, that would be okay as well. If you want to look at more than just this year and last year, for example. We provided you with a data file that's going to include this information. Each of you have this in your Dropbox folder, your project folder for your market. Now let's talk about what we're seeing on this data file. We've provided you with the latest 12-month moving average numbers there, performance for the market, by submarket, by scale, class, locations, and size groupings. Okay. Now this is 12-month moving average data as of the latest date. I don't remember what it was we've included there for you. Let me explain what you're seeing in these columns across the top. All right, you will see some columns that say TY and LY. That is this year, last year. You see some that say PC, that's percent change. So we're giving you this year's 12-month moving average numbers, last year's 12-month moving average numbers, and the percent change year over year. The occupancy, the ADR, the RevPAR, and the room revenue, we're also giving to you in both US dollars and the local currency. Okay, we give that to you in US dollars as a second currency for comparison. So if you're doing your market study on Hong Kong, you will have data there in Hong Kong dollars. If you want to compare that to other Asian markets or other markets anywhere in the world, in your comparable markets part of the component of the market study, you can use US dollars then as your common currency when comparing ADRs, RevPARs, or room revenue figures, okay? So you have both there in that file. You can display the market breakdown data in different ways. Again, you can use single bars for each category. You can use multiple bars, although again, I'd be careful with those getting too busy as well. If you're including multiple metrics, you can use multiple bars for more than 1 year for each metric. As I said, if you only have a few sub-markets, you want to show multiple years, that's okay. But again, just be careful that they don't get too busy. Historic trend lines for each category could be used, but again, don't let them get too busy, okay? In the abbreviated market study, we'll be analyzing data by class and sub-market. If you would like to also include scale, 2 slides for scale, you can, but you're asked as a minimum to include sub-market, 2 slides on sub-market, 2 slides on class for your market in this area. You're going to include, again, the percent changes and the actual values. We're going to display supply and demand together. We're going to display occupancy and ADR together on separate slides. All right. Here's some examples looking at Nashville again. This is Nashville by submarket, supply and demand percent change. All right. We're including the latest 12-month supply and demand for each submarket. It's very simple. Now, we've also included some very, very simple animations here to just draw your attention to things that we want to mention there. These can be helpful for your audience. They draw your audience's attention to those areas. They can also be helpful for the presenter, can't they? If there are things in the slide you want to be sure to convey to your audience, these little things can be hints to the speaker, right? So let's be sure and talk about what's happening in the Nashville Central Business District. What's driving this supply and demand growth that we're seeing there? Let's talk about the submarket of Nashville I-65 North. We're not seeing a lot of supply growth there, but we're seeing a significant increase, nearly a 10% increase in demand. What's causing that, right? That's important, the story behind the numbers. Here's occupancy and ADR percent changes by submarket again. Here's data, actual occupancies in ADRs. Now we're switching over to class, okay? Class data, supply and demand percent changes by class, occupancy and ADR percent change by class, and actual occupancy and ADR by class. I think I said 2, actually, I'm sorry, 3. Yeah, 3 for the submarkets, 3 for classes, so a total of 6 slides in this section. Okay. Okay. This next one here, comparable markets. This says optional. This is not optional. It should be included in your market study. This is some section, you know, I think this is really an interesting section or component of the market study when you can compare your selected market to other comparable markets. These could be similar cities in the same country, same continent. If you want to select, if you're doing yours on London and you want to select other capital cities, gateway large markets in Europe as your comparison, that's fine. If you want to use New York, Dubai, and Hong Kong as your comparable markets for this, I'll be okay with that as well. You should have a way of explaining how you selected those markets as your comparable markets, though, why they were selected, why they were chosen. I think there are a lot of good reasons, good explanations for selecting comparable markets or competitive markets or peer markets, whatever you want to call them. It could be based on the number of hotels and room supply. It could be based on conventions and conference space. It could be on the mix of business versus leisure travel. It could be on a lot of these things. One One thing I've heard before, I've heard students say this, and honestly, I just kind of had to shake my head. In the competition, when the judges asked some students and said, well, because the cities they selected for their particular competition, their comparable markets, they were a bit odd, I have to say. And one of the judges asked the students, as they typically do in the competition, what was your determining, how did you determine your comparable markets? You have to be real careful when you're phrasing that as a judge in the competition. There's a fine line between what were you thinking and what were you thinking, right? You know what I'm saying? So, so they asked the students, they said, well, what was your thought process in selecting your comparable markets? And they said, well, we looked at other markets that had a comparable occupancy as our market, or a comparable average rate as our market. Well, that makes them comparable in occupancy and ADR. That's it. They may not have anything else in common. And so stay away from those things. Okay. Look for other things that you could justify, that you could defend in selecting your comparable markets. I like to see at least 3 other comparable markets in my comparable markets. If you pick 6, 7, 8, I'm fine with that as well. Don't include too many. Again, your slides are going to get too busy. All right, you're going to spend forever talking about them. But I'll leave that up to you. Just make wise selections. Okay, I know you all will. All right, I'm going to pause here again. Do we have any questions before we look at types of business? Any questions at this point? Everyone's very quiet today. It's either too late or it's too early.
Dwayne?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Jocelyn.
If we're going to choose our comparable market, so we have to request the data from you?
You don't. You already have it. It's in your Dropbox folder. There are 2 files, and I'll open that up and we'll look at it again, make sure everyone fully understands what's in there. You have 2 files. You have one on global markets, larger global markets. You have one on U.S. metropolitan markets. 2 files. Those will each have the latest 12-month moving average performance data for those markets. All you need to do is decide which markets you want to use, go through and find the data for those markets, and which should be fairly easy to do in those 2 files. There you go.
Okay, we'll try to.
One of the things that a lot of the student groups I've heard in the past, they'll reach out to that local tourism bureau in that city. There's typically a convention and visitors bureau. There is a convention authority. There's a tourism office, tourism bureau, what we call now generically DMOs, right? Destination marketing or management organizations. Ask them who they consider their comparable or peer markets. And I think, they've done a lot of research on that. They can give you a lot of insight into why. And then ask them, once they tell you, here's who we consider our competitor markets or comparable markets, then ask them to tell you why they selected them. There's your answer, right?
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, that could be really helpful. I could tell you too, a little hint for those of you who are in the competition later on, judges like that. They like students taking the initiative to do that type of step, right? Reaching out to find out more from the industry people, getting their insights on things, and then bringing that back in part of their presentation. They like that. All right. Let's move on here and talk about types of business. Nashville is certainly a very interesting city in the world. I think it used to be a very leisure market, leisure driven, music driven market. We've now a few years ago opened a brand new convention center, the Music City Center, a beautiful, beautiful building, which has just tremendously increased the amount of convention and conference business and other types of meetings coming to the Nashville market. We also do have some fun here in Nashville. For those of you who did not know this, a little trivia for you. Nashville is the #1 city in the United States for bachelorette parties, okay? In case you didn't know that. True story, it is. Bachelorette parties, they're everywhere in downtown Nashville. So I'm not sure. I guess it's the music scene. I think it's the feeling of safety and the affordability and probably a lot of things that are contributing to that. So every market though has its own unique story to tell here when you're talking about types of business, right? And how you choose to tell that story in the most compelling way is what you want to try to do here. Now, there are different options when it comes to talking about types of business. And all of this data is available to you in a trend report, right? The performance data for all of these different ways of looking at this is available in the trend report. For example, you could look at weekday versus weekend performance. Now, at STR, and no one else really that I know of, is collecting business versus leisure, okay, information. Unless you ask a guest checking into a hotel why they're there, you won't know. They could be paying a standard rack rate. They could be there for a meeting. They could be there on vacation, right? You don't really know unless you ask them, unless you survey your guest, which of course is sometimes done by the hotels or by the local tourism bureau. But you could use this as a proxy, right? Weekday business generally is business travel. Weekend is generally leisure travel. Obviously not the case in all markets, but you could use it as a proxy. Day of week, you could talk about the performance of by different days of the week specifically. Seasonality, that's what we're going to use in this abbreviated version. And then of course, group versus transient business. That could be really interesting to look at as well there. So you can compare the different KPIs, both again, the raw data and the percent changes among these different segments. With seasonality, this is really interesting to look at, very valuable to understand the seasonality trends within the market. It does impact the different types of business and the travelers coming to that market. You can analyze the seasonality by using the monthly data. Now here, we don't want to use 12-month moving average, right? Because that's going to remove the seasonality, which is exactly what we want to look at here. So you want to use the monthly data. We're going to create some line graphs with different rows for each month throughout the year. We're going to stack those then in the same graph to show our seasonality. Here's the example of what that would look like for Nashville occupancy. Now this is a great graph because it shows you this how we have these a strong peak season, right, in the middle of the summer here in Nashville, but we also have very strong shoulder seasons, right? Very strong March and April, very strong September and October, spring and fall conference seasons, convention seasons, very, very strong here in Nashville. But what happens before and after that? Yeah, it drops off significantly. The weather is terribly hot here in the midsummer. It's not too pleasant either in the midwinter, and our occupancy just plummets, 55 to maybe 60% during the months of December, January, and February, as you can see here. Look at the average daily rate though. Average daily rates, there's a little bit of a variance there. Again, that peak there in June, stronger in the spring, stronger in the fall again, drops off a little in the winter there. Here you could note, if there's a significant premium or change from one year to the next in a season, mention that. Talk about, is there something that caused that? In 2019, we added a spring music festival, and that significantly increased both our occupancy as well as our average rate in the month of April here in Nashville. That's not a true story. I just made that up. But that's exactly the kind of thing you'd want to tell, right? What's causing those changes? Our next area here, pipeline and development data. The pipeline reports are going to provide you with an overview of development activity in your market. There's a summary tab there that's going to show you an overview of the historic development during the last 5 years for each of the chain scales, as well as the total market. There's a brand summary page. It's going to show you data by property. Excuse me. There's a brand summary page that's going to show you data by chains within the market, what chains are represented in the market. there's a data by property page, which is going to provide you with greater detail on all hotels, both existing and future in your market. There's a changes to existing supply that's going to show you some conversion activity that could be maybe important to tell that story as well. In that market supply report that you would use for this, and you all again have this as well for your market. Tab 2 is our supply summary tab. We know at the top we have that graph. That graph there is showing us rooms by scale, and we're stacking then the existing supply, and then on top of that, those that are in projects, okay, in the development, in construction, final planning, and unconfirmed. At the bottom, here's our historic snapshot information for our market. So we can see from this, not only what does the current supply look like by scale within our market, but then which has changed the most? Have we seen significant increase in one or the other? Have we seen a decrease in supply among one of the scales within our market? We can see that right here. And then the bottom right, this is going to be project information, right? Again, by scale, and then totals by phase. Those that are in construction, final planning, and unconfirmed. So we can use this information to pull together and look at supply changes over time. This is just using the information from that supply summary. We've pulled that together here to show you growth over the last 5 years by scale within the market. So we can see where are we seeing the most development. We can see here, well, that's in upper upscale, upper mid-scale rooms, right? That's where most of the supply increases have been here in the Nashville market. We can see that most of that is the supply is sort of the high end, isn't it? Full service projects, right? Upper upscale, some upper mid-scales there. Not all of those are full service, but that's certainly more than we're seeing among mid-scale and economy. Not a whole lot happening there at all. We can then talk about future development projects that are there, and we can use those same graphs that we include in the market study report, right? We can incorporate those or some sort of example or your own version of those, if you would like to, into your presentation. Here we're looking at both existing and hotels that are in the pipeline or in development, stacking those up there. Or you could pull the existing out, and I think this really does a better job of emphasizing those that are in development within the different chain scale segments, right? You can see here where most of the new growth is taking place. You could expand your market study in other ways as well. You could include additional tabs there to talk about existing chains that are represented. Where are we seeing growth within certain submarkets, for example, in our market, if you wanted to. Those are all good things to talk about. All right. I'm going to pause here and see, do we have any questions before we move on to these last couple of sections? Any questions? All right. All right. Well, I mentioned earlier additional data, and this is, not necessarily where this would be in your presentations and your slides, but we could talk about this just a little bit. There's some additional things that you could include in your market study presentations, especially if you were doing a comprehensive version of the market study. I mentioned earlier you could include daily data. I think that is very important. It's very valuable. If there are certain events. It could be a festival. It could be, again, a sporting event, a political event, a weather-related event. You can think of anything that's really going to, in a positive or negative way, impact hotel performance in that market. You could include that. You could talk about that, right? You can use the daily data from your trend report and look at that leading up to the event, during the event, and after the event. We're going to talk about, of course, next week's session is going to be on event impact analysis. We'll get much more in detail there. Forecast data, if it's available. We do produce quarterly forecast reports for the top 25 markets here in the United States and another 48 markets or so outside of North America, the US. On a quarterly basis, I have provided those to you in your Dropbox folder just for you to review. You do not have to include those in your presentation, okay? Those are just for you to kind of familiarize yourself. If you want to put a couple of slides in there on a market forecast slides, feel free, go ahead and do that just to enhance your presentation. You could do that. Host and profitability data, you could review trends related to additional revenues, expenses, different operating ratios. If you were doing that in a comprehensive version, you would. Also, other types of non-STR related data, third-party data that you could pull in, different economic data, and different travel and tourism related data. One of the things I mentioned earlier is often done is, you might reach out to the local tourism office and get some information some insights on that from them about that market. What is the for example, one of the hot items lately, of course, has been talking about shared accommodations, Airbnb and others. What has their impact been to, for example, the New York market? If you want to reach out and try to see if there's some data out there on Airbnb or on other shared accommodations, and feel free to include that. That's certainly okay. Airline data, you can include that. Different events, again, major attractions that are demand generators, conventions. These are all things that you can include, again, if you want to, in your market study. Really, you can put these in there at this point, or you can include them. Generally, they're included earlier in the market study when we're talking about when you're first introducing your market. The last area that we want to talk about, and this is probably the most important thing, okay? I tell you, I hear I've seen a lot of presentations, and it's essentially someone reciting the numbers that they read off a report. It doesn't really give me any insights. It doesn't show any sort of deep analysis. They're just telling me what's on a report. Here are 4 key areas in the market study that they all include. All of the different projects will include this. Your summary, the takeaways, a looking ahead, and for the future. The summary is going to review the main points in your top stories. Your takeaways, action items for different audience members. Looking ahead, what are the metrics and trends to keep watching? And for the future, what are some additional opportunities that could be explored in the future? Now, these are the ones that we're going to share with you, these apply to the market study. Again, these 4 slides, though, would be included in any of the projects. In the summary slide, here's an example of things you'd want to include. Summarize the major trends related to your market. What are your key stories? What are your key things that you want your audience to know and remember about your market? What performance differences were there within the market? For example, how has the economy impacted the market? How have major events impacted the market? What makes the market unique compared to other markets? We included an example here on Nashville. Takeaway slide. After the summary, you want to emphasize your industry takeaways. What should industry professionals be sure not to miss regarding the market? What are the practical applications for each different type of person in the audience? What are the important issues or concerns and lessons to be learned regarding this market? And then remember your audience. Don't forget who you're talking to and what they care about. Now, I've heard this done in numerous ways. And I think one of the creative ways is to imagine that you have different stakeholders in your audience. Imagine you're talking to the manager or the owner of a hotel. What would be an important takeaway for them? You're talking to tourism organization officials. What would be important for them to know? You're talking to a developer. What would be important for them to know? The head of a hotel company or a stakeholder, someone else who's invested in hospitality or tourism within that market. What's some key takeaways for them, right? And you can, personalize the takeaways as well. Make them practical and concrete. Stay away from generalizations as much as you can. All right. This is where you have to be a bit creative. We understand that. Here's some examples for Nashville, just some questions, more questions as well. Looking ahead, this is your third slide in this component. What metrics should be monitored closely in the future? What trends did you notice related to segments, types of business, or comparable markets that should be reviewed in the future? Have there been new developments in the market that will have an impact on the future? Sorry, there's a word missing there, isn't there? What will be the impact of current pipeline activity? And are there things to watch related to different economic cycles in the future? So based upon our analysis, some of our findings, are there things that we just need to continue to monitor, right? And here's an example and some questions based on the Nashville market. And then the last slide here for the future. Many times you're going to prepare a presentation, you'll uncover questions or ideas that require more time to research than you have to prepare. You can list some of these questions and ideas at the end of your presentation. If you have more time or can get more data, you can study some of these additional issues. If someone else is analyzing this market in the future, what are some additional things that they could study? If you present to this audience again in the future, what are some things that you could expand upon, some things that you could address? Now, for the academics, if any of the professors here, if you've done research projects before, you know that all academic research projects end with this, don't they? It's always, here are our findings. This is going to be very natural for you. What are our summary? What are our takeaways? What are some things we want to continue to monitor? And what are some things that could be built upon in the future? That's where the next person that's picking up your research and referencing your research, that's their starting point, isn't it? They're going to look at that and go, okay, here's something that they said could be explored beyond their findings. And that's where I can pick it up and take it from there, right? That's what you're going to include here in your for the future slide. And again, there's just a few things there for Nashville. All right, real quick here, market study variations, different variations of the market study. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. These could be on a market, they could be on a sub-market. There's different things that you could include as long as you stay within those parameters, within those components. And I've shared a little bit of those with you along the way. To get started on your market study, we've provided you with a standard set of files for your markets. I'm going to pop those up here in just a moment. Again, we're going to quickly walk through there, make sure everyone's good with what you see there. You can use the templates in the expanded version of the training, the expanded PowerPoint. You can use those examples, those slides, those graphs as examples in your own presentations. If you want to copy those over directly, input your data, change your axis and change your headlines, that's fine. If you want to create your own templates and use those as an example, you certainly can use those as a guide for what you should include and how you could present that data. But feel free to put your own unique take on it as well. All right. Okay. It doesn't need to be exactly the way we have it. It doesn't need to be a cookie cutter presentation for what we've done. As long as the components are there and you're telling your story effectively, you're gonna hit the mark. All right. So we're giving you your trend reports. You have property and room counts. You have a pipeline report. You have a industry data files that include 12-month moving average data. I've also, I think, included a forecast report, and I think I threw a map in there as well of the market and the sub-markets. We've already talked about this for the market study project. We're good there. This shows you the actual number of slides that you should generally include. If it's the brief version of the market study, roughly 15 slides. The abbreviated version, this is the one that you're all working on for your project, 25, maybe up to 28 or 29 slides. Let's go through these very quickly here, just so we're all good, and make sure if you have any questions, ask your questions here. Title, 1 slide. General makeup of the market, 2 to 3 slides, right? Current statistics, 1 slide. Trended data, 4 slides there, right? You're going to have one on supply and demand percent change, one on supply and demand actuals, one on occupancy and ADR percent change, one on occupancy and ADR actuals. The market breakdown, this would be 6 slides, 3 for the submarket and 3 by class. If you want to include 3 by scale as well, feel free to do that. If you don't want to, that's fine, but be sure it has these at least, submarket and class. So supply and demand, again, percent changes, occupancy and ADR percent changes, and the actuals for those as well. Comparable markets, 3 slides there. Supply and demand percent change, occupancy and ADR percent change, and then occupancy and ADR actuals. It is not optional. It should be included in your presentation. Types of business, you're looking at seasonality in yours. So 2 slides is all you need there. We showed you examples of those, 1 for occupancy, 1 on ADR. Pipeline data, 2 to 3 slides there. And then the end there, 4 slides, 1 for summary, 1 for takeaways, 1 for looking ahead, and 1 for the future. Okay. So if you have a group of 3 or 4 in your team, breaking this up, 25 slides to maybe 28 slides, you know, what is that, about 6, 7 slides each? Think we got that? Yeah, good. And then this is the comprehensive version, which is going to be, as we said, more extensive here. 40 slides, maybe in a few more than that would be included there, depending upon the length of some of these optional areas. All right, let's go through our quiz questions real quick, and then I want to pop open that Dropbox folder, make sure we're good there, okay? Feel free to unmute. Let's hear your answers. You can put them in the chat box if you'd like to. First question, number 10, which of the following is not a component of a market study? Which one did we not talk about? I mentioned it, but it wasn't a component of the market study.
Look at the market, demand generated in the market breakdown.
What's our answer here? B? All right, everyone's jumping in with B here, and that is true. Demand generators in the market. It's not a component, but you could certainly include that. Number 11, property and room count data serve what purpose when it comes to a market study? What do we think?
D.
B.
Let's see, a few of you said D. Did I hear B?
B.
Correct answer is D. All of the above is our correct answer here. Yeah. So this is data that we would use in the general makeup of the market section or the component of our market study. It does provide a great overview of the size and structure of the submarkets, class, chain groups in the market, and it does show the total number of hotels and rooms in the market, plus the ones that submit data, census and sample, right? So all of the above. Number 12, which is not an accurate statement regarding the current stats or the current statistics section of the market study? Which is not accurate. And I know that professors do not like not questions, so I apologize for that, but we have some not questions. I'm not a professor, so I can get away with that. I can get by with that, right? Correct answer here is
it D?
C. C is our correct answer here. C says displays the current month data to show the latest stats for the market. We don't want to use current month, right? If we're showing the current statistics, what do we want to use? We want to use that running 12-month numbers, right? Running 12-month data. Number 13, which is an accurate statement regarding trended data component of a market study? What's the best way of showing trended data? Yeah, line graphs, right? Yeah, line graphs is the best way to show that longitudinal data. If we're showing a lot of historic data, use line graphs, not bars. Number 14, it is recommended to include market breakdown for at least the following two segments. Which two did I say we need to be sure we include? That's right. Yeah. Submarket and class is our correct answer there. Well, I gave you the answer to the next one. We'll go ahead and read it. Number 15 says, which is not an accurate statement regarding market breakdowns. Of course, it's created a separate slide for each different segment. For example, a slide for each different submarket. That is not accurate, right? You include all of those. As we showed you in the example, you include all the submarkets on a single slide. All right, moving on here. Number 16, which of the following is not an accurate statement regarding the comparable markets component of a market study? Do you like all these not questions? Which is not accurate, which is not correct, which should not be included. Okay, I see C. Correct answer here is B. Let's see, it says, which of the following is not an accurate statement regarding the comparable markets component? It says, try to find comparable markets that are very different than your market. Well, that's the complete opposite of being comparable, isn't it? If they're very different, then they're not going to be comparable, right? C says, compare your KPIs, raw data, and the percent changes of the comparable markets to your selected market or your market. Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. So that is correct. Number 17, which of the following is not a type of business that you could analyze in a market study? Which one of these did we not mention? I think I heard someone say it. We think it's D? It is D. That's right. Quarterly data. We did not mention quarterly data, did we? Number 18, which is not a type of pipeline and development data to include in a market study? Now, one of those has nothing to do with development, does it? Yeah, and you're all getting the right answer. It's C, projected performance numbers of hotels that will open in the future. We're not including those. We don't know what those are yet. Number 19, what is the best definition of the summary section of a market study? Best definition of the summary section. What do we think here? Okay, good. I'm seeing the right answer now. It is C. That's right. What were the main points and top stories? Good. Number 20, what is not an accurate statement regarding the takeaway section of the market study, which is not correct? And that's right. Which one's not correct? A, keep takeaways as general as possible. No, what we want to do is try to personalize our takeaways, right? Understand, know your audience, try to personalize them to your audience. Okay, good. Number 21, what is the least important type of STR report if you have to create a market study? I think these are all helpful. I think these are all helpful, useful information in all of these, but one of these in particular we really didn't talk about today is something we're going to use in our market study. That is D, right? The census database file. That is correct. All right, just a few more here. Hopefully you can see these graphs are a bit small there. Number 22, it says, what is an accurate statement regarding the first graph of trended actual supply and demand data? You can make that out up there. Which one of these is accurate based on what you see in that graph? I've seen, let's see, C, B, and D. All right, everyone seems to be settling on the answer here. That answer is C. The last year, there's been a sharp increase in supply. And yeah, we can look here, actual supply numbers. We can look here from 2018 to 19. Yeah, that would be accurate, wouldn't it? That'd be a true statement. Sharp increase in supply. Number 23, what is not an accurate, I'm sorry, that wording is not correct there. What is not accurate regarding the second graph showing rooms in the pipeline? Which one of these is not correct based on that graph? I apologize for the wording in that question. I will correct that. Which is not accurate. What do we think? Anyone venturing a guess here? Correct answer is A. Says there are more mid-scale rooms in the pipeline than any other scale. Well, we can see mid-scale rooms right here. Definitely not more than any other scale segment, right? So that would not be accurate. A is our answer there. All right, that brings us to the end of this section on how to conduct a market study analysis. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. I do want to do this. Okay. And let's do share screen here, share. Let's look at this. Let's look at our Dropbox folder. Okay, can everyone see my screen there? The Dropbox folder. And we mentioned this just a little bit last week, but I just want to make sure we visit it very quickly one more time. And then if there are any questions as well on the market study project, what you've been provided with there, you all have access to this Dropbox folder, right? This includes the PowerPoint that we're using each week. It includes some of the other files and things we're going to be using week to week. The expanded training PowerPoints are here. So the long version, if you will, market study training is here. So you can access that as you or your group begins working on your project. And then the data, the files, everything you need for your market study project are here, okay, in that market study projects folder there. Depending upon which market that you are presenting on, if you've chosen Hong Kong, again, you have the census database is included there. You have a trend report, you have a pipeline report, okay, you have a forecast report, which you don't necessarily need to use, but it's there if you'd like to. And if you want to look at it, I encourage you, check it out. And then you have a market segments 12-month moving average file. This is the latest market, sub-market, scale, class, location, size data for your market. I've also included a map there. This is going to be the map of your market. And it's also going to show the different sub-markets within your market and how they're defined. If you want to include that in your presentation on one of your slides as you're showing the overview of your market, certainly you can do that. Or if you want to include it in the market breakdowns, when you're talking about the sub-market performance in your market, you can include it there if you feel that's more appropriate. You asked earlier about, well, how do we get the data for other comparable markets? That's right here. Global markets, 12-month moving average, and U.S. metro markets, 12-month moving average. So once you determine what those other markets are that you want to include, real easy to find them. They're by country, by market. the data is as of December 2012. And again, you have the same performance data that you have for your subject market there for comparison. Okay. For the US metro markets, same thing. These are just listed in alphabetical order. You have the same data. And I think here I did include only in, yes, the ADR, the room revenue, the RevPAR is only in US dollars, of course, because that would, of course, also be the same as the local currency. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the data that's included there? If there's something else that you, in working on your project, in your analysis, discussions with your group, whatever it may, if there's other information that you think you need or would like to have, send me an email. We'll certainly provide you with a few additional reports and data if you need that. If you want to look at the pipeline activity in your comparable markets, let me know. I'll send you the pipeline reports for each of those markets. If you want to include a bit of information on the slide about that and how that compares from market to market, let me know. We'll get you the data. Okay. Any questions you might have along the way, reach out to me, let me know. Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Hi, Dwayne. Yeah.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, how are you doing? How do we determine who the stakeholders are? Do we just choose who we're presenting to, or?
You can, if you wanted to. If you wanted to, for this example, create a couple of different stakeholders in your audience. Now, generally, if we were doing this for, if you were doing your analysis and presenting it, you would know your audience. You would, right, as best you could, who you're talking to. You could direct your comments and your takeaways to those groups of individuals, those stakeholders. Here, in this scenario, you could just come up with a couple if you wanted to.
Okay. All right.
One of the things I'll mention this too, and I think this was really interesting in one of the student competitions, the student team, 4 different students, they each took on the persona or the role of one of those stakeholders. So they said in their takeaways, I am a hotel developer. And the most important thing to me in this analysis was this. Then the next student, I am a hotel owner. This is the most, I thought that was very creative, the way they did. That was their approach. I'm not saying that was necessarily what has to be done or anything else, but they did really well with it.
That's really great, because actually, I thought it was
creative. Yeah.
When you're normally presenting to a group, like there is more than one stakeholder, so good for them. Good.
Yeah. They, again, they were speaking to a panel of industry judges and a bunch of students. So they had to make it up. They're like, imagine this is who we would be talking to, and these are some things for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Certainly. Good. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me this week. We'll get you out a little bit early, not half an hour early. That's good, right? Have a great evening. Have a great day. Stay safe. I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. Your homework, you have homework. We always have homework, right? Take a look, if you would, at least a preview again of that next section, how to conduct an event impact analysis. That's what we're going to be talking about next week. If you have any questions, if you think of any questions from this week, if you come up with any for next week, bring those to next week's session, or as I always say, send me an email. I'm always happy to answer those outside of the sessions as well. Okay. I'm excited to see what you all do on your projects. I really am. Hopefully it's not only a learning opportunity. You're going to get you're learning something from this, but it's also going to be sort of a fun exercise as well. It generally is from experience. All right. Everyone's good for this week? Okay. Well, have a great evening. Have a great day. And again, I'll see you next week. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks to thanks to
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.